All right, today is July the 15th, 2016, 7:43 a.m. in the morning. My name is Bobby Dean Curtis. I'm on my way to Dallas, Texas, out on vacation. I have had a number of issues and I'm trying to come to terms and understand what is behind the issues the last couple of months. And essentially here's what happened. For the last couple of years I've had white vans, vehicles following me, people, individuals out there, and initially I didn't interpret it as stalking. It was kind of a well, didn't interpret it as stalking. Felt like that they were hanging around and was just kind of an intervention, that sort of thing. That was my interpretation of it anyway. It was kind of a do no harm situation. What wound up happening though over time is, as the months rolled on, essentially in May, I began to notice two key dates. Before January 1st of 2016, I felt like I had been intubated waking up one morning. But definitely in sometime in April or May, and I'm not really sure when, I began to feel like that I had some sort of ocular implant. And the ocular implant seemed to be able to pop and have a almost torturous effect anytime I began to disagree or have any kind of issue or any kind of problem. Now, what wound up happening with this, and it's important, and I'm going to just roll through a few sequence of events with this, but there were several incidents that took place along the way once this thing seemed to come online at Calvary Christian Center on Mother's Day, 2016. Seemed to come online, and I could hear things in my head, people talking to me and me being able to respond back. And first of all, felt like I was almost being brainwashed, keeping from researching what kind of technology it was, because just the way my brain works, usually I would go through a step-by-step process, but I felt like I was being brainwashed at that point. And then it wound up being a situation where I felt like I was being misused, in the sense of anytime I would want to try to do something that there was a disagreement about within myself, or I would get mad, then there would be some popping, that sort of thing. Vehicles began to get a little more demonstrative, and they're showing up. I would have black Dodge Rams consistently showing up, white Caravans, that sort of thing. Felt like that day publishing was being somehow sabotaged out there from being successful financially, and there were just a number of issues out there that seemed to be coming to fruition. And the problem with all of that was I couldn't figure out who was behind it. And I felt like I had some sort of cochlear or ocular trans in my right ear, and it seemed like I could hear, and then it began to sound like, and I felt like I always call it Stephen Hawking technology, because Hawking seemed like he could verbalize things that he was thinking. Well, essentially that's what it was. I began to research that out, and the more I began to research that out, well, I didn't actually, let me just say this, I didn't research that out at all. I began to think that through. I never could sit down and figure out how to research it, which felt like to me I was being kept from researching it and figuring out what it was. Several incidents happened with feeling like I wound up on the highway in 2000, wound up on the road and felt it was unlawfully, in my opinion, detained for they called it Baker Act, for 72 hours to see if I was crazy or not. I was obviously not crazy, but I was unlawfully detained for that, put in a mental institution for 3 days, which was obviously a fake mental institution because it was almost a caricature of One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest sort of thing, and was unable to leave. Again, was kept there against my will, even after asking to leave. And then found myself driving in Dallas, hanging around, driving, that was not in Dallas, Texas, just hanging around, and yeah, it's almost like there's a counter effect to this that makes it almost impossible to think that someone can just run through my head. And I feel like there's an ocular device in my right ear that someone can feed counter thoughts that makes it almost impossible for me to think. And I do have attention deficit disorder as well, and sometimes my mind wanders, and even now I'm looking at Dodges all around me. And yesterday I filled out a state police report in the state of Louisiana. Dodge Rams, Dodge Caravans all around me, left and right. License plates, some of the same people felt like that were with me in Daytona, who had driven all night long, had driven not only to Daytona, but also had driven from Daytona all the way to here in Louisiana, Lafayette. I went to federal court yesterday, Magistrate Judge Whitehurst, who essentially told me that there was nothing she could really do as a judge, and that I really need to go see the public defender. Went to see the public defender, said that I should go to the FBI. I've sent a cease and desist letter to, I believe, T.D. Jakes Ministries. I have arrested media. I have reason to believe that representatives who worked for them or previously worked for them may be involved with that. And I have heard a couple of names out there, and I'm not going to name those names, but I've heard a couple of names out there, and I am curious to see that. But I've heard Ontario Green, and I've heard Antipas Harris name mentioned in connection with this device. And it's important to point out as well that I had heard Elon Musk's name mentioned with this several months ago while in DeLand, Florida, during my stay there, that he was involved with this. And then I was also told it was a PTSD experiment arranged by the federal government, and that President Barack Obama was involved in it. They even used Barack Obama's voice to essentially kind of give me an attaboy and suggest that that I was going to receive a pardon for being a part of the experiment and those sorts of things. So it was just one of those deals where it was a weird scenario that was playing out, and within my head, because of this ocular device that would allow me to have conversation. And bizarre to think that it would be telepathic, because it's not. It's obviously if I'm able to speak as Hawking would, and then would be almost able to broadcast. And I began to test the theory, because I would think something, and just bizarre episodes like, if you don't get from in front of me, and then cars would move, that sort of thing, which began to be way too consistent and really led me to conclude that my theory is, and based on just overwhelming evidence, that people are able to anticipate. They're also able to pry into my personal life, see what I'm thinking about, sexual history, past sexual history, all of those things. I've had just a number of issues where just been followed and consistently. So my plan is to go to Dallas, Texas, and sit down with T.D. Jakes Ministries, or T.D. Jakes himself, have a conversation about whether this is in there. I realize that even though I've filed a state police report against persons or persons unknown, with a series of license plates and pictures that I took of vehicles that were following me. I'm not filing a FBI formal complaint right now, simply because I want to wait until, and I realize that, of course, interviewed by the FBI, that is my decision, and to file the complaint or not file the complaint, but I still have to tell the truth, regardless of who, what, when, and where is involved, even if it's Bishop Jakes himself that's involved. And we'll tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. My conclusion is, and this is very important before I get out of this, regardless of what good comes from this, because there's been some good that's been a part of this, and it's important to understand that. But it was all based on people manipulating me to do what they felt like was best. In my opinion, that was their motives, and good or bad, that just can't happen. And it's criminal surgery. It had to have been surgically implanted. I had to have been essentially put to sleep, and with some sort of date rape drug or something like that, so I had no memory of what had happened. And basically it installed, and surgery against my will, and I've even heard that there was some sort of signature giving it approval out there. I in no way ever authorized an implant within my head to do this, and if there is a signature out there, it would have been a series of paperwork or something like that someone pushed to say, hey, you got a signature, but I in no way ever agreed to have this sort of thing implanted in my head. So my intent is to go to Dallas, Texas today. I believe, I've been led to believe through this device, sit down with Bishop Jakes himself, he and I privately, and regardless of the outcome of the criminal investigation, which is obviously in full swing, he understands that, and everybody from the Potter's House, T.D. Jakes Ministries, FBI, everybody on the planet understands that I'm going to tell the whole truth. I have a book, and I have my life story that I had a year ago sent, or back this past year sent via a friend of mine that was locked up with, Bernard Jones. They've shown interest in buying the movie rights and the book rights. I wouldn't sell it for any kind of hush money or anything like that, and it's important to understand that right now before I go, and I'm not inoculating myself against that. That my issue with this is I feel like the book is worth whatever I negotiate, and I've got a life story that if anyone reads the sequel and the first book, I think stands on its own, it stands on its merits. So one has nothing to do with the other. I'm going to meet with Bishop Jakes today, and we are going to get this ocular implant out. I want to see and understand whose name is on the receipt, and who paid for this. And I have even been led to believe that my son Jordan may have had one of these devices put in, and if so, not without his knowledge, but agreed to have it put in, and if so, then that's something that probably the FBI needs to understand as well. So that is my intent. I'm going to Dallas, Texas. If something should happen to me in between, then I have been led to believe that no way I reach Dallas, Texas with this device in my head, and because they want to take it out and essentially, I guess, destroy the evidence, and that's not going to happen. So if I do not reach Dallas, this is on my iCloud. It is out there, and is on my iCloud, and I'm essentially going to zip this down, and it's on my phone, but I'm essentially going to zip this down and also email it to myself. So it'll be out there, and I am going to so the records out there can't be destroyed. You can't destroy an iCloud anyway for 6 weeks, even if you put it in a delete or trash bin. So anyone who would think they were going to hack and just put it in the trash bin and it wasn't going to be there, it's going to be there for 6 weeks. And so that's essentially it. I went to, like I said, Louisiana State Police Headquarters, filled out a criminal complaint